Hello, America. Tonight, it's another fun-filled Friday on the Beck program. Revolution. That is what we're going to talk about tonight, but in a historic context. And we have people in the audience who are from Hungary and Russia and Cuba, from countries all over the world that have experienced revolution. And revolution, up until recently, is a word that everybody thought was ridiculous. I mean, it was really a forgotten idea. It was thought of something from the old days in our dusty history books that apparently nobody reads anymore. But the events in Egypt and Tunisia and around the Middle East have served to put us on alert, I hope. Too many people right now are saying, oh, gee, a revolution, it's great. No, it's not. Because revolution is just the beginning. And it's a reminder of what a small but dedicated group of people bent on revolution can accomplish. We can easily forget the seeds of our own country were planted in revolution. How many countries that are existing right now in the world have their roots in revolution? I'll give you that answer in a second. Our revolutionaries were different. A lot of these are revolutionaries. Oh, I love this guy. Wish I had a t-shirt of this killer, huh? Or a Christmas ornament of this killer. These are many of the revolutionaries that are currently around and some of the old ones. But there's another group of revolutionaries that were much, much different. The founders were not a massive group of people. They didn't even all agree. Only 25% of the American population wanted to separate from Great Britain. Another 25% of Americans didn't want to separate, and 50% were like, whatever. Not really that different now, is it? But these men were dedicated, and they worked, and they plotted, and they planned, and they used their different abilities. There was Sam Adams, and Ben Franklin, and Thomas Paine. They got the message out to people. He did it through churches. He did it through his pamphlets that were handed out. Then there were people like James Madison and John Adams. If today's media existed during the American Revolution, the attacks would have been, oh, these guys, they're getting together with the Koch brothers and they're finding cash to fund an uprising. What they're doing is they're going to foreigners and getting cash. That's what they would have said, because that's what they did. The founders worked together, and they planned and they organized, even though they didn't agree. And they moved towards revolution. History has shown us that this happens time and time again. When there is unrest and discontent, people and groups who may not agree on everything work together to try to overturn the government. That's what these guys did. And the founders, what they did is they just broke away to form something new. The most organized, the group that is standing there and says, I've got a plan, they're the ones who usually stand in the end. The founders started talking about breaking away and self-governing in 1754. And then in 1770, the British started shooting. But it was 6 years later before this guy wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he said we should just break away. That was 1776. Here's a stat that, because it happened so long ago, we probably don't have the proper context on. 1776 is when we broke away. When did we get the Bill of Rights? When did we establish the government that we have right now and get the Bill of Rights? Anybody know? 1791 was the Bill of Rights. That's a long time. That's decades of planning, and then war, and then fighting. This guy, by 1789, this is Hamilton, he was actually arguing with all the other guys that we should maybe have something more like Great Britain again. The founders didn't agree on everything. Alexander Hamilton wanted to go back to the British through a revolution. This revolution was successful, but most are not. The French Revolution fooled some of our founders. Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson were both wrong about the French Revolution. The French Revolution, these guys thought it was a good thing. These two. When Robespierre decided to start to execute and behead the king and anyone else that got in the way, Paine, who had gone over to be a part and help out in the French Revolution, actually found himself in here, the Bastille. Paine was like, whoa, whoa, wait a minute, hold on just a second. And it landed him in prison for an execution. Fascinating story on why he wasn't executed. Maybe we'll tell you that later. I want to stick to the French Revolution. It's said to have begun on a tennis court, June 20th, 1789. It was inspired by ours. Started here. It was on a tennis court. They were locked out of the typical meeting place, and they swore an oath not to disband until they had drawn up a constitution for France. Once power changed hands, Robespierre became powerful. In an attempt to stabilize the country, he went on a reign of terror. Remember, how many times have I said that people will beg for someone just to make the madness end? So he did. Anyone who was deemed a threat was executed immediately. It was a horror show. At one point, people used to go and they would cheer for the beheadings at the beginning. And Robespierre got to a point where they were taking kids and infants and killing them. It was mob rule. 40,000 people were slaughtered in the French Revolution. It ended not with Robespierre or any of the guys who started it. It ended with a dictator, Napoleon. Their revolutionaries weren't rooted in principles like our founders were. So when the pressure came for jobs and food, what did they do? They do what most revolutionaries do. They start killing the weak and the old, all enemies of revolution. They do it. They start to kill the old and the infirm and the weak. Why? To save money, to help the economy, and to create jobs. That's the French Revolution. It's what happens every time, unless you have something that these revolutionaries had that nobody else has had before or since. This guy was a great example of it. And so was this man and this man. A profound belief in God. But all of them, maybe we could lose this guy. All of them were good people. The French had people believing in a collective. The American Revolution understood that real power came from God and then to the individual. And they recognized that each individual mattered to God. That's why we weren't rounding people up and burying them in a mass grave to save tax dollars or to create jobs, because the individual mattered to God. The French Revolution was also centered around atheism and amorality. It's the antithesis of what Jefferson and Washington believed. Washington said that religion and morality had made the American experiment so successful. We know that Jefferson said a republic would only function with good and decent and religious people, and so did John Adams. The French eliminated religion and God. Now, the question was, how many nations right now, the 192 nations in the world, how many that are currently existing started as a revolutionary one in its own history? One. With the guys who started it, one. No one else even comes close to the 235 years under the same piece of paper. France, to give you some example, France has had 15 different governments since those guys lived. Now, revolution is the hot buzzword in the world, and new revolutionaries are coming forward, and they're trying to transform America and the globe. Ask yourself, will they be more likely to stand in line with Robespierre or George Washington? And who has the most organized group? Because that matters in the end. Joining me now is the author of this book that is absolutely fantastic. You should have it in your bookshelf. Robert Galately. He is the author of Lenin, Stalin, and Hitler, The Age of Social Catastrophe. Also, he is a professor of modern European history at Florida State University. Joining me via satellite from London is British historian Andrew Roberts. He is the author of Napoleon and Wellington. I've had beef Wellington. And his new book is The Storm of War. And in California, to talk a little bit about the new revolutionaries, David Horowitz. He knows he's a former revolutionary himself and the author of Unholy Alliance, Radical Islam, and the American Left. Let me first go over the pond here and find out what do I have wrong in the French Revolution? Do I have it right?
Yes, you've got it right. I think it's centrally, as you say, an atheistic attack on the established order. It very quickly, within 4 years of the fall of the Bastille, turns into a bloodbath with people being guillotined for primarily political purposes, but also because of who they are, where they come from in the social class. And then, of course, it winds up at the end of that decade, in 1799, being taken over by Napoleon, who, as you mentioned, was able to offer jobs and stability and an end to the terror, but of course becomes a dictator.
Does it always end? No, it ends in France. Professor Galele, let me go to you. Does it always end with revolution, madness, and then a strong man coming in to stop the insanity and promising, I'll feed you and I'll care for you?
Well, I think, roughly speaking, that's how it happens. I mean, nobody really objects when revolutions begin. Mostly they begin when people agree there's an oppressive system, people are suffering, there's torture and that sort of thing, and there's a general agreement. A whole new group of people then enter into these revolutions. They have ideas of their own. There are other people, for example, who may not even be in the country at that time, who come from abroad, like Lenin, who wasn't in Russia when the revolution broke out. He came back, he knew perfectly well what he wanted. And he was, and when he...
Well, wait. Before you go to Lenin, let me just spend a minute here, because how many people are here from former Soviet Union? A lot. Boy, have we forgotten here in America what the former Soviet Union really was. But before I go to you and find out what it was to remind us, let me ask you how it started, because most people think of Lenin coming